Greetings, I'm Chris Newman. I wrote this book, Fraud, Plunder, Treason, and Our Treaty, to explain to everybody in New Zealand and all our friends and allies the history of the Treaty of Waitangi and how it is that in recent times the innocence of the original treaty has been smothered by a host of political agendas which have hidden the real meaning of the treaty from all of us and got everybody tangled up in arguments and discussions about matters which are away from the treaty. The book is available at, you can see the little logo, Newman Press. newmanpress.com online, you can order it. And through the presentation, the next few minutes together, I'm going to explore the topic, let's honour the treaty. And the treaty was drafted in English on the 4th of February in 1840, translated into Maori on the 5th, and signed at Waitangi on the 6th of February. Since the 1980s, all government legislation has recognised Te Tiriti of Waitangi as the founding document of our nation. To honour the treaty means we respect or abide by the spirit and the letter of Te Tiriti. So let's get going and explore this together. What do people mean by honour the treaty? What's that all about? There's demonstrations, they've got placards and big banners, honour the treaty. Well, in 1841, the Great Seal of New Zealand honours Te Tiriti. I guess you can look at that closely and see in the middle is Queen Victoria, and she's surrounded by 8 loyal chiefs. These are representing the people who signed the treaty, and it makes it very clear that everybody is in unity and that the people understood what they meant by their treaty. It was a unifying event. And the nation's first coat of arms from 1911 honours the treaty. You can see on the image there of the woman on the left and the chief on the right, and in the middle is the crown, the lion and the Union Jack representing Queen Victoria. The 3 treaty partners were the Queen Victoria, the chiefs and tribes, and the people of New Zealand. And the Maori text of the treaty declares that, I'm going to say it, ko te kuini o Ingirani, ka wakarite ka wakai ki ngā rangatira, ki ngā hapu, ki ngā tangata katoa o Nu Titani. So the New Zealand people understood way back in 1911, everybody knew that there were 3 parties and that we were united. However, in 1975, the Minister of Maori Affairs, Matthew Rata, introduced a fraud to the Parliament, and he dishonoured Te Tiriti because he said there was an English treaty text which was different from the Maori language text. But what did he show the Parliament? He showed them a document called the Freeman Royal Style Report, and he presented this as if it were the English treaty. But the text that Freeman wrote is neither a draft nor a translation, because Freeman was Captain Hobson's secretary. He was not an official participant in the treaty proceedings. He actually wrote it with the first version on February the 7th, after the treaty was signed at Waitangi on the first signing there. Oh boy. Under the Crimes Act, Rata's fraud on Parliament nullifies all subsequent government treaty legislation and statutes. There was no English treaty. It was all in Maori. Now, why did Rata choose the Freeman document? Well, Freeman was the assistant to Captain Hobson, and he was an English gentleman who had come through Sydney and had been in New Zealand for 8 days on February the 6th. And he wrote his version of what was going on around him, and he thought there was only two parties. He called it Her Majesty and the Confederated and Independent Chiefs of New Zealand, and he wrote his report along those lines. However, Rata in 1975 took that old document and introduced the idea of a Crown Maori partnership. There was no crown in 1840. It was Queen Victoria representing all of her subjects. And there was no Maori. There was tribes and chiefs and tribes. There was no unified Maori nation. There was no entity called Maori. So Rata needed to introduce this idea of a Crown Maori partnership to eliminate the non-Maori New Zealand people who were represented by the treaty. And also the English words that Freeman used state things like the possession of their lands and estates, forests and fisheries, and other properties. However, that language is not in Te Tiriti or Waitangi. That was not included in what the chiefs and tribes signed. So therefore, Freeman's words were not in the original English draft written by James Busby on the 4th of February, or the Maori text, and were not appropriate or relevant. In fact, the chiefs and everybody discussed it at the time, and the matter was never a part of the proceedings. However, Matthew Rata wanted to open the government's door to iwi corporation claims for political power as a Crown Treaty partner under some sort of imaginary contract. And he wanted to permit iwi to make Waitangi tribunal claims to all the resources of New Zealand as their plunder. And iwi corporations hide behind this veil of race-based tribalism. Now, we value the treaty and we honour what is honourable, which are things like integrity, honesty, and truthfulness. However, the social world of contradiction contains dishonourable elements like deceit, dishonesty, lies, and falsity. Presently, there's a whole politicised thing around the treaty, whipped up by people who are gaining plunder, money, land, assets, political control out of twisting the meaning of the treaty itself. So I must ask the question, what's the worth of the Maori mana of the iwi when it's based on hearsay, lies, and greed? And I must ask other people who believe in Christian values what they're worth when they're cut adrift from the underpinnings of the 10 Commandments, like don't bear false witness and don't covet others' goods. So where does the integrity of the Parliament go when its treaty legislation is based on a criminal fraud? Now, there's a lot of background to the treaty, and I'm not going to go through every slide and every detail, but it's there for you to check it out for yourself. Huge changes came to New Zealand between 1800 and 1840. The outside world basically burst in through the different ports, but then young Maori men had been sailing around the Pacific, crews on whaling ships, on trading ships, on timber ships, all around the world, off to America, off to England, off to Australia. And so they brought back a lot of reports, these young people did, hundreds of them over that period. So the tribes, the chiefs and tribes were very well informed about what was going on. However, during this period, they got their hands on muskets and were able to amplify traditional Maori warfare, which up to that time was conducted with sticks and stones, you know, little spears and clubs. And they replaced those with the musket. Now, Christianity had arrived here, and it was an attempt to bring in law and education and principles to a pretty wild frontier society. There was about 2,000 Europeans here in 1840, sealers, whalers, farmers, people trying to make little farms, traders, opportunists, escaped convicts from Australia, all kinds of characters. So that's part of the background. And with the muskets that they had obtained from England from about 1806 onwards, the tribes had got involved in an arms race. It was sad. So they turned their arms on other tribes, the muskets. And the chiefs and tribes operated under their tikanga tribal law system. And that was a pre-Old Testament idea of mana, utu, tapu, and muru. A very rigorous tribal control by the chiefs who practiced revenge warfare, cannibalism, plunder, slavery at the Stone Age level. And they were very efficient at wiping each other out once they got hold of muskets. We believe 40% of the population, Maori population, was exterminated by their fellows over that period. There were 2,000 Europeans here, and they were pretty much living on their own means on the frontier. So this country was a wild place. And it was wilder than the wild west of America. Kororareka, or Russell, was once named the hellhole of the Pacific, and it was a place of dishonor. We look at the data we have. We know that in 1830, for example, there was about 100 whaling ships came in to Russell, passed through the Bay of Islands, and the Maori chiefs pimped their women and taxed the ships. And the sailors provided lots of lawlessness and violence. The traders sold everybody alcohol, and the civilized people stood back because the whole place was, in Russell, just the village there, was pretty much a powder keg. Then there was the musket wars, and this diagram shows you a contemporary drawing of a tribal group doing a haka, which would have been frightening and thunderous. They're brandishing muskets, and the military technology of the Europeans, rapidly seized upon by Maori chiefs, changed their whole game. Hoingi Hika, the first one to understand this, got hold of about 600 muskets. He brought them back to his northern Ngāpuhi, and they set off on raids across the country. The other tribes, some of them were defending their paths with just 2 or 3 muskets they'd obtained against 600. They didn't stand a chance. So the fascinating story, 20 years of this warfare, Maori upon Maori, and some of them conducted campaigns, long-distance campaigns, they're called tawa, and took over and destroyed other groups that they had ancestral grudges towards. The Europeans were shocked. The missionaries were appalled. They were drawn in because they wanted to protect their local friends from the incursions of the wild tribes that are armed. Oh, goodness me. And so attempts to calm things down didn't work. There was only one solution. That was to look to the higher power. But the Brown Bess musket was the one which was used in the musket war. This is the British military firearm. It was in issue from about 1722 to 1838. Range 100 meters, effective, quite powerful at that range. It could take out a man. And a smooth bore, not highly accurate, but fired round lead balls. And if there was hundreds of these employed on a mission, goodness me, there'd be cannonballs flying everywhere. Now, the musket war Utu-based arms race was ferocious and fearsome. And this is another drawing taken from the time, and you get an impression of this incredible warrior spirit, but now armed with a ferocity and an ability to project power that they had not traditionally been able to achieve with just the ordinary mere and the fighting spear, taiaha. At the time, Christianity was profoundly influencing the formation of New Zealand society. The missionaries were here. The Maoris were fascinated by the idea of the Christian God and all the ideas of the New Testament, the kingdoms and the kings and so on. And then we move to the next part of it, which is the missionary activity, which brought the Maoris had a strong sense of honour, but it was decimated by the musket wars. So the Christian missionaries taught the chiefs about the Bible, Jesus Christ, the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, and civilized traditions of peaceful relationships. And so the influence of the missionaries had a big impact. But also there was the lawless and rebellious settlers or people, escaped convicts. As we say, there was only 2,000 of these, and there was 100,000 Maoris survived the musket wars. So Christianity was quite a force of intellectual, emotional, and social impact. Now the chiefs became concerned with their war, their musket war, because of the heavy attrition, and they didn't see a solution. They also had memories of contact with early European ships, and there'd been some incidents. The tribal massacre of Marion Dufresne and his crew in 1771, the Boyd catastrophe in 1809. They thought that there might be revenge sought for those events. Some settlers were really worried about the lawlessness and exploitation of Maoris by Europeans using alcohol and wanting to seize land, and Maori chiefs going to Sydney to sell their land to get money for muskets. Oh, things were a mess. And so the idea was, how do we keep out the French if they're going to come here? How do we pacify and calm down all this musket war business? How do we control the wild settlers and guys running around the place? And so, reluctantly, all the appeals to Britain brought forward the authorities thinking, how can we bring peace to these distant lands? Why do we need New Zealand? We've got an empire that goes around the world. We've got Canada, America, Australia. So many big places and important things to look after. Oh my goodness. So they decided, out of the humanitarian spirit, remember, most of the parliamentarians in England had been behind the abolition of slavery. These were the same men, and particularly men, who had obliterated the slave trade in parts of the world using the Royal Navy, and they wanted New Zealand to be a model settlement. And so, according to accepted international standards and best practice, they resolved to offer a treaty here, and the treaty would be like an engagement, not a wedding, an engagement. And the engagement idea was that everyone would agree to move forward under British Pax Britannica. And Captain William Hobson was sent here representing the Queen, Victoria, and British common law to all people. He was experienced in the Caribbean, where he had led military operations against slavers. He was well conversed in diplomacy. Unfortunately, he was also carrying a tropical disease, like a malaria or something like that, which, even though he was a wonderful man, it made him ill at times, physically ill with the fevers. But he acted on instructions from the British Foreign Office, overcame his physical difficulties, and invited the chiefs and tribes to consent, expressed according to their established usages. That's honourable behaviour. And the Europeans here were included as subjects of the Queen. So Hobson's motive was sincerity, honesty, mildness, and justice. 6th February 1840, the participants signed the treaty. And this is a rendering of that event in a great marquee at Waitangi on the lawn. And the treaty document was subsequently sent around the country for 7 other signings. A very honourable way to proceed. It was an honourable solution to violence and confusion, bringing them to a conclusion, but only outside intervention, of course, by the British Empire could bring this to a conclusion. and the best interest depended on the authorities addressing both Maori tribal warfare and European lawlessness. So there were three parties from the outset: the Queen, the chiefs and tribes, and all the people of New Zealand. Captain Hobson greeted the signatories at Waitangi, saying, "We are one people now, he iwi tahi tātou." Now there's the honour, it comes in. There was only one treaty, one version, it's the Maori one. Everything was done in Maori. The three participants were the Queen Victoria, as I'm saying, repeating this, the chiefs and tribes, and all the people of New Zealand. No crown, no contract, no unified Maori. It was individual tribes. Now the document was translated by missionaries who'd been living here for 20 odd years. They were bilingual. They knew very well what they were saying, writing, and the chiefs agreed. Everyone had a discussion about it and were treated fairly. So they signed with honourable intention. There's a copy of the original document written on parchment. It's an historical document. It records the event. However, we now, in this time, in the second millennium, 180 years or whatever after the treaty, we now have fake document and the real document. The real one, and you can read these for yourself. We've got the treaty in Maori. We've got James Busby's original draft, a Littlewood document, which translates literally into the Maori by the missionaries. And we have the 1869 T.E. Young government translation, which is right up the line, very accurate. And then we have this dragged in royal style thing by Freeman, which Matthew Rata claimed was the treaty. And then we have Professor Hugh Kafaru, who in 1985, he gave his version of the treaty to comply with Matthew Rata's agenda. So it's a subtle reinterpretation of the document, and it is not in accord with the original intention, the way he's redefined keywords, kawanatanga and so on, rangatiratanga and taonga. He's changed the definitions of the words, and if you need to look at those original words, the dictionary of 1845, written by the Williams missionaries who translated the treaty, is available online for your study. So the Treaty of Waitangi, let's honour its meaning. By now, I think you're getting the grasp of this. The common law document, and it's very accessible to all New Zealanders, and all the people at the time knew exactly what it meant. You can read that slide for yourself because it follows on from everything we've been talking about. It honours the signatories' agreement, their intention to unify as one people, nothing more, nothing less. It is not a legal contract, a commercial contract. It does not involve statutory people. It's individual living humans, not a government legal document. There was no government in New Zealand. The British government parliament didn't have any governing power down here. So it does not establish a two-party Crown Maori partnership. No way. It does not recognise any state overruling individual rights or anything like that. It is based on biblical principles, and it is, if you apply those biblical principles and the British common law principles, we must reject, and the recent attempts to interpret the treaty through Marxist eyes, secular humanism, globalism, moral relativism, any other non-Christian, non-Bible based systems of rule, philosophy or political order. So it doesn't sanction tribal rule, co-governance, race-based separatism, rangatiratanga and tikanga in any way, shape or form. The treaty is the treaty, and that's what the chiefs and tribes agreed to. Funnily enough, for us, the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, which are the underpinnings of the British common law, entered New Zealand at the same time with the treaty because they are the underpinnings. The Bible is about personal responsibility through your creative free will, and the Magna Carta establishes one law for all and an honourable system of law binding on the king, also binding on the chiefs. That's the whole point of the principles of the treaty, which are found in the Bible and the Magna Carta, not in government statute. And if you're not clear on that, the great Maori prophet Ratana, T.W. Ratana, who passed away around 1939, I believe, but during that period, he delivered his message to all of Maoridom, every marae. He said, with the treaty in one hand and the Bible in the other. And you can see that here, right in front of you, on the in that picture of Ratana holding the treaty and the Bible. And he accepted the treaty's principles very clearly based on the Bible and the common law. There's the 10 Commandments. You can read those for yourself. And that's why we swear in the New Zealand courtrooms to tell the truth, and we swear on the Bible. Now, the next two slides are going to review that relationship between the 10 Commandments, the treaty-based Bible principles, which all the chiefs and tribes in 1840 were well aware of. And you can study those. On the left, I put the Bible principles, on the right, how it's dishonoured. Examples. Oh, this is terrible. So we see all this now very clearly. For example, people who claim they're Maori, but everyone who's a Maori in New Zealand has mixed bloodlines, they are dishonouring their father and their mother. That's an example. Stealing stuff from other people, using iwi corporations to plunder the New Zealand government and the New Zealand people of money, land and assets, all conducted under the cloak of racism. Well, what about another prominent Maori, Sir Apirananata? What did he have to say? Well, he said that Article 1 of the treaty transfers all chiefly authority to the Queen forever. And he made it clear because the text in Maori is so absolutely simple. Ko ngā rangatira o te wakamanenga, me ngā rangatira katoa hoki, ki hai I uru ki taua, wakamanenga ka tuku rawa atu ki te kuini o Ingarani a ke tonu atu ki kawanatanga katoa o a rato whenua. Absolutely clear. There's no ifs and buts there. The chiefs all knew what it was about in 1840. Even if their descendants have decided to change the whole thing, they're going against the truth. In 1940, that 1840 event was commemorated at centennial by a plaque, which is on Auckland's One Tree Hill. You can read that. The bottom paragraph commemorates the honourable surrender of Maori sovereignty to the British Crown when they received the rights and privileges of British subjects. Well, to end this whole nonsense about the treaty as a partnership and all that, we must reject and banish that stuff. It's dishonourable. It's dishonouring the treaty. It's dishonouring the chiefs and tribes and all the people of New Zealand of 1840. And it's dishonouring all those who honestly and sincerely accept the truth, which is also recorded in the Bible and in the Magna Carta. It's a gift from Imperial Britain. It provides us with the means to resist, reject and defeat tyranny, to banish dictators, to judge and sentence traitors, to direct our parliament, to protect the innocent, to live peacefully, and to assert our sovereignty as one nation under God. New Zealanders, let us honour Te Tiriti, which is our treaty. I encourage you, if you want to take the matter further, you can order my book, Fraud, Plunder, Treason and Our Treaty, online. See, there's the picture of the treaty itself, the signing. And it's available from Newman Press. Thank you for your attention, and I trust that you have enjoyed this time together and learned the key points. Best wishes. Let's unite as New Zealanders under our treaty. God bless you all.